Go up into the land beyond the plough, where a sheep's worst enemy is other sheep, where the belty herd roams as free as the jawbone walls that map the centuries on Yorkshire's dales allow. Yes, here. Go here. The land loses its man-made maps without animals, without people huddling through a cold winter, learning how to fail and fail better together, dreaming of a landscape that lives in symbiosis with money and with love.
I felt increasingly angry at seeing how much grain, which people could eat, was being fed to livestock, pigs and poultry obviously, but particularly being fed to ruminant animals and herbivores to whom this was not their natural diet. And it so happened that I went to a conference on transition farming, and there by chance I met John Crisp and John Turner, who were both already raising their ruminant animals wholly on pasture. And we just decided why don't we do something about this? Why don't we encourage other farmers to raise their ruminant animals wholly on pasture, which is their natural diet? The following January, we held a meeting at the Cheltenham Quaker Meeting House. Just 14 of us, 16 of us came, and we agreed what we felt at the time were the important founding principles. The first was that we should define what we meant by wholly pasture fed, which became the standards. The second was to ensure the integrity of that definition, which became the Pasture for Life certification mark. The third was to share the journey with everyone else who shared the vision, the broader vision of farming with nature. And the fourth, and I think very importantly, was to be non-judgmental. And I think that last one particularly has served us well.
I was one of probably the original founding group, and bearing in mind for the first 2 years, from sort of 2009 to 2011, it didn't have a formal structure. It was very much a movement, for want of a better word, just a collection of people who felt there was a real value in it. So during those early years, although we had John very much in his sheepdog mode, nudging things forward, it was very much a case of people just got on with it. If there was something to do, we did it. And I think, what we were trying to do was make sure that we were well positioned for where farming needed to be in 20, 30 years' time to meet those challenges. We felt that there was a real value in decoupling ourselves as far as possible from some of the inputs, the costs of fertilizers, and taking a little bit more ownership of the value, because we felt this was this sort of bucolic, sort of pastoralist type of way of producing all these sort of products from livestock was something that was often referred to by people, doing the marketing, that this was wonderful, this is the British way of doing it. And actually it was a fig leaf, because most of the production wasn't that way at all.
We found very quickly there were all sorts of organisations claiming we're grass-fed, or we're this way or that way. But when you scratch the surface, you find that, for example, grass-fed in most farmers' ideas means that their cattle eat grass sometimes, as opposed to a wholly pasture-based diet.
It is crazy that we grow human edible food like grains, like soya, and then we feed it to ruminants to create meat and milk, when those same ruminants can live on forages that we just cannot digest. I mean, ruminants are amazing. They're a way of transforming something totally inedible to something that is edible and has a great nutritional content. And it just seemed like this sort of underpinning of what we're looking for is sustainable systems for ruminants is one of our key starting points. I was working with a US organisation, and I'd offered a small amount of support to the American Grass-Fed Association in the revision of their grass-fed standards. And somebody at that time from PFLA, I believe John Meadley, contacted the American Grass-Fed Association and said, you know, this is what we are, we're PFLA in the UK, we'd like to do some grass-fed or some pasture-fed standards, and we'd really like to understand what you've done. So the conversation went sort of across the Atlantic and back again, and I ended up talking to John Meadley and John Turner about what the Pasture for Life standards should look like.
When we did that first set of standards, we put them through, and I think I'm pretty sure by the autumn of 2010, we'd got them into what we felt was a good working draft form. And bearing in mind that the associate at the time, we felt up to that point there wasn't any need for a formal association, because the real value was just as a discussion group, and we defined what pasture fed meant. It started to become clear that those standards would need to be administered by somebody and owned by somebody. That really meant putting a formal structure in place for the organisation itself. And that's where we settled on the Pasture Fed Livestock Association.
One of the early meetings we had, I think it was probably about the third one we had, it just struck me that we were predominantly male, not entirely, but predominantly male, predominantly well the wrong side of 50. And I felt that we really ought to be getting, if we possibly could, be getting younger voices in there. And I did a search on YouTube for young farmers and climate change, and Russ Carrington popped out of the woodwork.
And some of our early meetings as a group of farmers they kind of felt really special. They felt really pioneering. And I remember in particular we were huddled in Rob Richmond's kitchen in the Cotswolds. And Rob Richmond was an Upfield scholar, and he was sort of presenting his findings about how we could be farming using biology rather than chemistry. And it felt like a bit of an underground movement, huddled in this little cottage in the Cotswolds. And we felt really like a grassroots movement.
I became involved with the PFLA when I saw an advert for their very first meeting. I think it was at the Bunch of Carrots pub in Herefordshire. And it was a small group of farmers and maybe a couple of butchers. And I met John Meadley and Russ Carrington, and I was hooked immediately.
So our business plan had been to think we'd get lots of people to join up. We'd then get certified members paying us levy, and Bob's your uncle, would be up and running with the money. But it clearly wasn't going to be like that, and it still isn't like that. So we've had to seek funding from charitable organisations, and I would like to give amazing recognition to the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and particularly to Lawrence Scott, who's been our grant manager all the way through. And right in those early days, he showed faith in the PFLA, and all the way through there's been little bits of money coming in from Compassion in World Farming, the Sheep Drove Trust. Some of those, they're just small amounts of money, £5,000 or so, but it was absolutely everything we needed just to do a little piece of work to edge us forward.
Once we had secured a few funds, there was then a need to kind of running and administering this very small group at the time. And I remember a conversation at the Oxford Real Farming Conference with Chris Jones and John Meadley over breakfast, kind of figuring out about how this might work and what we needed to do next, and that we needed someone to do the work. And they both looked at me and said, "Well, you're the youngest, so maybe it should be you." It was always difficult to kind of know, with such limited resources, where to spend my time and the time of our volunteer directors and other members that were willing to put time in.
So I offered to help, and I led on communications. We thought that if we targeted consumers and we generated demand, and then they couldn't find any supply because the farmers weren't supplying it, then we'd lose those consumers for good. So we decided to focus just communicating to farmers, telling mainstream farmers about our wonderful, innovative farmer members who were producing beef and lamb purely from grass.
So I've been on quite a few of the study tours and I found them really great. So they were particularly good, as there was between 20 and 30 on each visit. And so I really enjoyed the one to Duncan and Angus Nellis's, and I knew them a little bit beforehand, but not visited their farm. So to see them and their commercial organic system running on fairly marginal land was really good, really inspiring. I also enjoyed seeing Denise and her innovative charcuterie, which kind of shows that just because someone else isn't doing it, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a go.
So when we had the study tour here, Russ, who was the executive manager at the time, asked me to read from The Soil Never Sleeps to the group, and I love that.
Or go down into the southern valleys to unblock drains that bleed brown when the rains come heavy, to stop the very best of the fields from running off to make war with cars and roads. Go out and sing with the corncrakes at dusk in the spaces you have made for them, sacred in their stillness, in the deceptive silence of abundant growth.
We have a fantastic message attached to our products that are grown as naturally as possible. We need to get more people eating Pasture for Life meat, drinking Pasture for Life milk, eating Pasture for Life cheese. People who are health conscious can find the nutritionally dense, good quality food that they need from Pasture for Life farms.
I think Pasture for Life brings together many strands. So looking after nature, looking after our land, building good soil, and that just goes all the way through to the plate. And what I find is astonishing is that you can really taste the difference. I think there's a sort of length and depth of flavour. And there's a distinctiveness as well. And that you came to understand was about where those animals had been eating. The pasture was this composition of lots of different plants. And I think there are quite a lot of consumers who when they're eating meat, want to know the values behind it.
Biodiversity, human health, animal welfare, climate friendly. And they're getting those different things across to consumers was absolutely crucial, and it continues to be. I think globally the whole grass-fed movement is increasing. I'm increasingly in touch with more organisations or even smaller groups of farmers that are keen to establish this sort of network and these sorts of brands. And so I think globally that will really help bring grass-fed, pasture-fed into much more into the mainstream.
It's great to see how farmers who may not be going 100% pasture-fed, but are recognising the benefits of reducing their inputs, extending the grazing season, and replicating some of the aspects of pasture-fed farming that might be appropriate to them in their context. And there's definitely a shift happening, and it's great to be a part of that.
When you play chess, I gather you keep moving the pawns forward, gradually. And this was what we had to try and do, was incrementally find farmers who are willing to take the risk, I suppose, and begin to create the supply, and then build the market around that. But I think we're getting to a point now where we have people who are wholesalers and retailers who are actually anxiously looking for supplies of Pasture for Life produce.
At the beginning, when there were only 80 members, it made sense that everything was being done by volunteers. As we're much closer to 1,000, it doesn't really make sense that everything is being done by volunteers.
And this is something that I think most organisations go through at some point, and you move away from having a very kind of passionate and energised group of founders who are often doing things for free and moving to a phase where actually you do have some money to be able to pay people. And I suppose ultimately this came down to having a bigger team of people who were doing fewer days a week, all bringing in different skills. We suddenly just had this kind of explosion of dynamism and excitement.
We now identify ourselves as Pasture for Life. It works on so many different levels. It's a beautiful, beautifully simple, phrase, and I think it just sums up everything about what we stand for.
The public really hold the key to all of this. We can hope that the government get behind what we're doing from a policy perspective. I think we can feel confident that academics and researchers are going to provide the evidence that what we're doing is really positive for environmental, animal health and welfare and human health reasons. But it all ultimately requires the public to seek out Pasture for Life products.
Having contact with the consumers and selling our meat directly, and them really understanding and wanting to come out of their way to buy meat from our farm gives me a huge sense of satisfaction, because I know they're all coming to us because we're 100% grass-fed. And new customers now always ask me the question, are you really 100% grass-fed? Are you sure? And I can say, I can promise you we are. And look, we're certified with the Pasture Fed Livestock Association. We're Pasture for Life certified. That is your guarantee that we are 100%. So I think it's those little sort of steps forward that make you think this has all been worthwhile. Because really, if you look back, even just 5 years, the attitude towards grass-fed, people just didn't really think about it, I don't think.
And I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, we will mature and grow even more.
It does come back to the people. And just to see an organisation that is so well regarded right across industry, right across the political spectrum as well, and for that to have been achieved in 10 years is actually something quite special. I can't think of any other organisation out there, farming organisation, that's achieved so much in such a small time. Without compromising any of its values or standards. That is something quite special.
Go into the towns and cities laden with produce and stories, your tongues ripe with carefully disguised science, the bare bone facts dressed in the muscle of myth and memory. Too much fact runs off busy people like water from compacted soil. Learn how to open them to the seeds of ideas. Water them with stories. Watch them grow.